Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to literally stretch the very idea of what flexibility means. For most of our lives, we've been taught to view flexibility as a matter of forcing our muscles to lengthen, almost like stretching out a really tight rubber band. But what if we completely reimagined it? Today, we're shifting our focus away from stiff mechanics and moving toward fluidity and ease of movement. We're diving deep into the groundbreaking work of Terence Hughes, who teaches us to treat the body's interconnected structure a whole lot less like a rigid machine and much more like a continuous, tensioned spider's web.
Okay, I want you to think back for a second. Recall that classic gym class hamstring stretch. You definitely know the one. Standing up, hinging at the hips, aggressively reaching down for your toes, and just holding it there, gritting your teeth through the discomfort. We've literally all done it. But what if that approach is actually structurally incorrect? What if the way we've been taught to prepare our bodies is based on a totally outdated anatomical blueprint?
So here is our roadmap for today's explainer. First, the old myth. Then, true flexibility. Third, the structural twist. Fourth, inner flow. And finally, the wave demonstration. Let's jump right in.
Section 1. The old myth, or what we'll call the lever and hinge illusion.
Look, conventional flexibility training basically rests on a pretty small taxonomy of named techniques that we're all super familiar with. We've got static stretching, where you passively hold a muscle in mild discomfort. Dynamic stretching, using controlled movement through a range of motion. Ballistic stretching, that's that momentum-driven bouncing you usually only see elite athletes doing because of the injury risk. And finally, PNF, where you contract a muscle before stretching it further. But here's the thing. What all four of these techniques have in common is they're all desperately trying to answer one single question. How do we force one specific muscle to lengthen?
Well, there is a massive, hidden assumption baked right into that standard taxonomy. These conventional methods falsely assume your body is basically a mechanical crane built of completely isolated levers and hinges. They're written as if a muscle can be lengthened as a local, isolated event, just totally independent of the rest of the body. Now, they aren't wrong on their own terms, they do produce local range, but the source material argues that the underlying premise of the body as a collection of separate parts is fundamentally flawed from the get-go.
Moving on to Section 2. True flexibility, fluidity, and ease of movement. This brings us to a really crucial point. Flexibility is not simply range of motion. Instead, 50 years of practice-based work suggests flexibility is actually your capacity to sense residual tension. The tension just sitting there uninvited in your system and then learning to switch it on and off deliberately, synchronized with your breath. Range of motion just becomes a happy byproduct of that control. It's all about tension literacy. You aren't overpowering a muscle. You're communicating with your nervous system.
Section 3. The structural twist. The body as a web.
All right, the magic word here is biotensegrity. This totally flips the script on centuries of assuming our skeleton is just a rigid frame with soft tissue draped over it. Instead, biotensegrity shows us that our anatomy is actually a continuous fascial fabric. Your bones act as compression elements that quite literally float within a body-wide tensioned network. I want you to visualize your body right now not as a stack of building blocks, but as an incredibly complex, continuous spider's web.
Think about it. The old lever and hinge model assumes you can just isolate a local event. But the spider's web model, biotensegrity, shows us that tension is always distributed. In a true tensegrity structure, you structurally cannot isolate anything. If you pull on any one thread of a spider's web, it redistributes tension absolutely everywhere across the entire structure. So, that standing hamstring stretch? It was never just a hamstring event. Your whole fascial web is actually reorganizing around it. Section 4. Inner flow, joints, space, and circulation.
So when we actually move this interconnected web correctly, particularly using traction, we aren't just blindly tugging on muscles. It's so much cooler than that. Imaging research using MRIs has found that applying axial traction to joints creates real, measurable physical space inside the joint capsule. It actually decompresses the joint. It improves the visibility of articular cartilage. It is a mechanically distinct event from just elongating tissue. You are quite literally creating room within the joint itself. And creating that space and moving that web has another absolutely critical function. You see, your lymphatic system, unlike your blood, does not have a central pump like the heart. It relies entirely on your breath, joint movement, and skeletal muscle compression to circulate fluids and immune cells.
Because lymphatic vessels are physically interwoven with the fascial system, every single time you deliberately articulate your joints and move with fluid ease, you are physically operating your body's lymphatic pump. Flexibility work literally becomes essential circulatory work.
Which brings us to Section 5, the wave demonstration, where we're rebuilding the hamstring stretch. So how do we put all of Terence Hughes' incredible science into actual practice?
The difference here is night and day. A conventional stretch is completely static. You hinge in one plane, hold for 30 seconds, and just try to isolate one posterior chain while totally ignoring the rest of the body. The wave sequence, on the other hand, is a dynamic, whole-system event. It treats your spine, torso, shoulders, and extremities as being in a continuous tensional relationship with that hamstring. Let's see exactly how this works in 2 parts.
Let's break down the wave. In Part 1, we start with that familiar base position reach, but bam, we immediately change the rules. Second step, we integrate the lumbar spine. Instead of keeping the lower back rigidly passive, actually it actively participates in the shape. Third, a rotation is initiated from that lumbar engagement, and that carries all the way up through the torso. We are instantly introducing a cross-lateral, multidirectional flow that simply does not exist in a static, single-plane stretch.
Then going into Part 2, the movement expands even further into the web. The arms move in a circular pattern, extending the tension out through the shoulder girdle. Then a light isometric contraction is layered into the arms, so your nervous system is actively managing tension in your upper body and lower body simultaneously. We add these small, granular movements at the wrists and ankles to hit the true periphery of the system. And finally, the whole shebang is tied together by a single outward breath. The exhale is the timing mechanism that links all these distributed tension releases into one beautifully coordinated act. And this brings us to the ultimate takeaway from our source material today. The old ways of static pulling and forced isolation, they're basically built on an illusion. As this quote perfectly summarizes, the standard model was built one muscle at a time for a body that is not actually built that way. Your body is this remarkable, floating tensegrity structure that thrives on ease of movement, tension literacy, and whole system connection. Which leaves us with a huge choice for how we treat our bodies from here on out. The very next time you warm up, cool down, or just try to shake off some stiffness, are you going to treat yourself like a machine and just pull a lever? Or will you breathe, sense the tension, and move the entire web? Thanks for joining me on this explainer. I really hope this completely changes how you move.